do I know the core tech and do I know the core market like deeply enough? And if not, can I research and understand it well enough to make a decision that this is the technology to go with? I would likely go with what can you fix now? What is something that is an absolute pain pill, not a vitamin? And you want to pick the startups that are pain pills. And I learned my lesson in the great financial collapse that just going to monster.com and clicking a bunch of jobs is just not the way to go. What really worked out well was picking the top 10 companies I was most excited about, figuring out who at the company works and do I have any connections, any way that I can break in.
Okay, What Work Podcast, new episode. We're very excited. Tyler, I think I can speak confidently on behalf of both of us when I say we are extremely excited for today's guest, Talha Husayn. Talha, this is something you don't know about us. We've known you since, I think, 2019 because Orum was one of our early customers here at Hireframe. And so it's been a handful of years already. And we've had probably dozens of conversations over the years. What you don't know about those conversations is whenever Tyler and I hit end call and it's just us two, we always bask in this halo of knowledge and insights and energy that we always get from our conversations with you, whether it's something mundane and business related or just catching up. So we've been looking forward to doing this for a long time. And this today, what we're going to be talking about is we're talking about a topic that I think is very timely because of what's going on kind of with people's jobs. There's a lot of layoffs going on. So meaning it's January 2024, by the way. And so when layoffs happen, a lot of really hardworking, ambitious, sometimes entrepreneurial people, they're, looking for new opportunities. So they're in the market and they're trying to figure out what kind of companies would be a good place for them to take their talents essentially to make their next stop. And you are someone who's had an incredible set of experiences working at various startups as an early employee, as part of the founding team. You're having a ton of success at Orum, so you picked right here. But also, I'm sure you've had some failures or some bumps in the road along the way too with other startups. So we're very excited to pick your brain today about, for anyone out there, how to identify a good company to work for. So yeah, that's the topic of discussion today. And Talha, if you would do us the pleasure of introducing yourself even more, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, sure. Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here. And yeah, my name is Talha Husayn. I'm on the founding team here at Orum. So I joined, before we really even had a name for the company and was building it out. And previously, this is the fifth startup that I've been at, but really one that I'm on the founding team. But I joined previous startups as either the first actual hire and or the first sales rep. And so I've kind of rolled the dice multiple times. And I, really started off my experience as an SDR at a company called RightScale, where I was actually given a chance because you think about the other people that were interviewing there. Was a really great company. And somehow they rolled the dice on me. And that's where I got my experience there and becoming a top SDR and really getting my first, my first taste of, SaaS and how different it is from, some of the other ways that, businesses operate today. And that kind of launched my career into, startups. So super excited to, share what I've learned over the last, decade and, even where, I think things are going.
Very cool. And I will say that before we do want to, as Mike mentioned, the job market right now is pretty, it's in flux. Don't want to necessarily call it crazy, right? It's just in some sort of state of change. So there are a lot of people that are out there looking to pick the right next opportunity. You have, I would say, picked a winner. I can say that, with some degree of confidence. Orum's been around now for a minute. Before we do get into some of the factors and the criteria that you used to ultimately decide whether or not to join Orum, and then other decisions you made in the past regarding your various roles, would you mind just sharing what Orum is? If you're in the B2B sales world, I imagine you've heard of Orum, but some folks maybe haven't.
Yeah. Well, first off, I want to say that we are doing really well right now. And it's based on a lot of our experiences that have built over time, put us in this in this position. But things can change instantly, right? That's the thing about SaaS. Up until you get to a certain stage, it's very possible that a competitor comes out and completely wipes, off the face of the planet. Not saying that's going to happen with Orum, but, with OpenAI, when that came out, everyone with their custom LLM models and their AI models, they're getting smoked compared to a free service. And so they're having to, refactor that. And so I just want to put that out there. Like right now it's doing good and we hope it continues to do well. But when it comes to Orum, what Orum is a live conversation platform. And we really first started the platform by focusing on the most manual and tedious effort of making calls, where reps would spend hours a day making calls to only get a handful of conversations. And live conversations today, especially across most B2B SaaS, is still the highest performing in terms of conversion when they occur, right? As well as the most valuable because you're actually having a live human connection. And so that's really where we focused. And now it's, grown into a virtual sales floor where you do have the ability to call alongside your fellow reps, but more advanced analytics, call history, AI objection detection, AI summaries. I mean, there's a lot of adjacent product lines and there's a lot more that we can do. And I think the end goal that we've always had is saying, how can we help the sales reps do more with less? How can we automate as much of the work away? Because even the day when I sell, most of your time spent is not actually selling. It's all the admin work and the clicking and everything else in between.
Totally. I can just firsthand, and I'm sure anyone who's ever had to make a certain number of dials per day has been in the shoes of an SDR, right? When I first, got my start in outbound sales, I just remember how exhausting it was to just, and I don't even remember what platform we were using, Ring Central, whatever it was. And you would, literally manually click the button, make the call. And you would do that so many times without getting a single human being that when you finally did get a connection, I personally would be like so surprised that I would totally fall on my face for like the pitch. And, as an SDR, right, a lot of it is you're not going to be a natural on the phone. It's just not, you might think you might be a natural when you're doing role playing on the team, when you actually get that live customer connect, right? So then it's all about repetitions. You have to get a certain number of reps in. And I feel like Orum has an incredible value prop, minus all the use cases and features you guys can expand into over time. Just the mere fact that you're getting SDRs more reps and faster and making it more efficient. So a rep knows that when the phone actually does connect, you're getting a human being, which is pretty cool.
Right.
So I feel like right in there, it's using my own words, it's a hugely valuable thing for an SDR or a sales leader or anybody. So that's really cool. Just in kind of transitioning a little bit. So you did pick a winner. I would love to hear a little bit about how you did actually come to find this opportunity at Orum, because I know that you have, some background, obviously, with the CEO, Jason, and when you and I started first working together way back when, you were pretty much it. You were man of many hats at Orum. So I'm very curious, how you went into actually finding this opportunity for yourself and what went into your, decision-making, whether or not to join the company, and how, this is a big kind of loaded question, but how that relates to past opportunities, factors that you might have learned along the way, because Orum is a big win for you, a big winner, but they weren't all big winners along the way. So I'd love to hear kind of, specifically, how did you find this opportunity?
Yeah. And I think as you go through your life and as you're, especially in startups, and if you're in this space, right, and you want to take on more of an entrepreneurial role, I mean, startups is where you go, right? You get to jump up, you get to jump up in terms of responsibility. You're expected to put in 150% and you're taking on a lot of risk. So like, why would anyone do that, right? Like, why the heck would you take on so much risk? You could just go to, go join Microsoft or LinkedIn and sit back on the cash register, right? Like that's like, you can do that, but you're not going to go from an SDR to, let's say, a VP, right? Within, 2 years. They're also not going to get as much experience across the whole business. So if you want to be an entrepreneur, right, joining that startup, having a direct line to founders, being able to make changes to the management layer, right, and how that affects the entire organization, that's why you join it, right? But because of that, when you join a startup, especially early on, I was always going in with very rose-colored glasses, I wasn't thinking about things like, oh, what's the burn rate? Like, like metrics, like, hey, I never would ask the question CAC, hey, like, what's your CAC like? What's your customer acquisition cost, right? Like, what's your net recurring revenue? What's your, what's your GDR? Like all these other metrics. So there's a few things that, come to mind that, and then, I'll get into, how I came across this opportunity, is that I was always vetting now after going through these experiences, a few key areas. Like, first off, what is the core tech? Do I know the core tech, and do I know the core market like deeply enough? And if not, can I research and understand it well enough to make a decision that this is the technology to go with? Then what is the startup stage, right? I've joined at various stages of a startup, and understanding like where they are in terms of, again, burn rate, funding, metrics, like what does it actually look like? Are they healthy? Where are they trending? And then vetting the founders, right? It's not just their answers. Many times you're going to talk to a founder and they are going to be, they are sold on the dream. That's why they're doing it. And it's very easy to get pulled into that, and you assess their answers, but you're not actually assessing who they are, right? Have they done this before? What's their track record, right? And then are you genuinely excited? I see a lot of people who join startups because they want that experience, but they're not genuinely excited about it. It's not something that they can wake up at 6 a.m. and they're so excited to do, right? And then I'd say the two other things that had been brought up throughout initial conversations we were having was like culture, right? How do you vet culture, especially at a startup where you might be the one who helps define culture? And then how is the business currently adapting to the current economic environment, right? The current economic environment changes, right? Some of the ones that I think about, especially when it comes regards to that, is you think about COVID, right? If you were joining a company during COVID, how is it handling the current economic environment? If you were a company like that was delivering food and groceries, that was definitely a great company to join. Now, if you were a company that focused on retail interaction within a store, then you were kind of screwed. So you have to also do your best to understand what is the current economic environment, and is it going to be feasible now? Because you can only sell what's on the cart. So I know that's a lot, right? So then I'll just quickly dovetail into Orum. So specifically with Orum, I had met Jason actually through a really close friend, and we became, Jason today is still one of my best friends, right? Even though we work together at the startup, and we have very passionate conversations on product to, company direction. And at that time, it was funny enough, he was leaving RightScale at the time that I was entering RightScale. And so we became friends, and we generally, we can talk about business till, the cows come home, right? We love startups, we love technology. And so we kind of bonded like that. So over the years, we kept in touch, and Jason was the first sales hire at a company called Rubrik, right? That went from 0 to 100 million in 6 quarters. Extreme success, well known in the infrastructure space, and we're directly under the CEO Bipul Shah, right? Where Jason learned a lot as well. So it was kind of that time when I was looking for a new startup. I was interviewing for directors of sales development positions at a lot of recognizable logos, and Jason at the time was getting that itch to actually start a company again. And that's when he approached me, was right in the middle of those interviews, when I was just like, hey, I need a job, I need to make some money. And he said, hey, why don't you join me? We'll start up everything, and we'll make absolutely no money, and we'll take all the risk. And you probably should just throw away the offers you have, because we're going to start this company, and I'll show you this tech. So once he showed me the tech, it hit on a few things. It hit on core tech. And am I genuinely excited? I knew I'd used these solutions before that were shitty, that were really expensive. And I knew that this is one way to democratize access to it. So I got, genuinely excited, and I already knew the founder, right? Like I really very much vetted Jason more than, any other person possibly could, because I know him. So personally. So I think that's where, it came to be, or at least for me.
Yeah. I want to interject just on that piece before I lose that train of thought. How did you knew Jason, your colleague and your very good friend. How did you think about Jason, the CEO? Were you able to separate those two things? And I mean, this is obviously quite hard to do. Mike and I are co-founders, and before we started, our Hireframe together, we were friends, but we both had to think very critically about each other. in these roles. What went into your thought process around that? Was it hard to separate the two?
Well, and I think that's a great question. You need to compartmentalize, especially if you know the person personally, because a lot of times when you join a startup, there are a lot of people who join startups because they know someone there on the founding team or the founder directly, right? They might have worked with them at a previous company, so they have some like working relationship, which is really powerful. But if you don't, right, like, and this is your friend, in many cases, people always say like, don't go into business with your family and friends, right? That is the common thing that's always said, is never do that, and it could lead to issues. And I think part of that is understanding that, hey, you're building a company, and in certain terms, like the company comes first. You have to always do what's right. So if you feel that if the founder themselves has the same mind and we can compartmentalize, then the arguments are always about, we're always on the same side of the table, right? We're trying to attack the problem. I would also say that if I wasn't friends with Jason, which is something that, I thought about, like, let me imagine I'm not friends with Jason. How am I going to vet him independently? Well, let me look at his work history, right? He's been a top seller before. And then let me look at his work with Rubrik, but also let me understand, how does he think about growing a company, right? Is he trying to be CEO because that's just like, he needs the title and that he wants that respect and he wants to have his hands in all the cookie jars? Or is it to build a really solid executive team and the founders really don't run the company, right? And understands the different stages of growth and where to do with that stages. Like, okay, Jason's had that experience. And so, compared to other founders that it's their first time or they've never hit any sort of scale, I felt pretty confident that, felt really confident actually that he would be a great CEO and that we would be able to make decisions, the best decisions, quickly, even if I didn't agree with it, right? And I think once I hit that mark and met Karthik, who's the founder and CTO of Orum, and saw how logical he is and saw how he arrived at decision making, I knew that doesn't mean we're not going to ever fight and that we're never going to have big disagreements, but I know that I could trust that there was a logical and business decision that was going to be made and that that wouldn't get compromised. So
you said logical. I'm picking up on that a lot and wondering, did you don't have to throw anybody under the bus. We're not trying to, out anybody here, but curious if that's been your past experiences where you worked at a company and the founder or the executive leadership team or individuals, right, where struggle with that ability. It sounds like almost like keeping their own personal emotions and ambitions out of things. And if I'm summarizing correctly, it was important to you to see in Karthik and Jason that they were able to, really keep the business's best interest always number one and kind of remove ego as best as you possibly can.
Yeah. And I mean, I've been at startups where, ego kind of ruled the day and that there was almost a level of irrational confidence in either the product or product market fit, and then not allowing for flexibility when it came to either selling or testing or using such products. And that, led to, significant issues with churn and could be was almost like the death sentence of the company, which goes to show that when it comes to a startup, everything that I mentioned, those points that I made, you can nail everything and you can still run into problems. So I think it's a good segue into kind of the experiences, and I can talk about each one if that is the...
That would be great. Yeah.
So, I think about when I go back to RightScale, that one is, to this day, it's funny. Me and Jason, again, we both were working there, but at separate times. And if you look at the RightScale alumni, the people that were there, they went on to companies, onto like really great companies around the Santa Barbara, that whole area. And what's fascinating to me is that if you look at a lot of these people, they're all directors, VPs, founders, right? Like we had an amazing set of talent within the company of RightScale. RightScale did one thing right. It was attracting some of the best talent that I've ever had a chance to work with. And that's vetted by where they are now. Seeing that some of them have taken companies where they are or grown in such capacity that you normally wouldn't see. And I knew that what the core tech was enough to where I knew it was valuable. So I knew that, hey, everyone's going to be moving to the cloud, right? And this is at the beginning of the time when I would call people in IT and tell them about the cloud, and they would say there's a cloud out their window. Like that was the response I was getting. And so the startup
Amazing.
stage was roughly between Series A and B, well founded. The founder had success before, and the burn rate, the funding, the metrics, they all looked good. And I was genuinely excited. So I was hitting all these pieces. And then the culture itself was amazing. I loved all the workers there. I could go in early and leave late, and I wasn't getting burnt out. But then, in even the economic environment, which was coming back from the major crash, right, it was starting to get better. So it seemed like everything was in a row, like everything was fine, and we were crushing it. But then all of a sudden, like the product environment changed very rapidly because they're in a very tumultuous new space, and so just almost seemed like immediately, right, that the product we were offering was now technically free through open source means, and that the methodologies of how you manage your servers was now open source through products like Puppet and Chef, and so configuration management was now open source, and they had built their own configuration management system, and so it was just one innovation after the other where they spent a lot of time and product and sales energy on was now no longer relevant. And the most relevant thing to do would be to go multi-cloud, but most people were really using one cloud, right? And so it was just one of those experiences where you can do everything right, you can check everything that I mentioned, but then the product market fit can change on a dime instantly. And so what I learned there though is that if you have everything else right and that doesn't happen, you're on a rocket ship. Like if all those pieces are put together, you are going to be on a rocket ship. I saw how I was like employed like roughly around 100. We went up to like 500, right, in a matter of like a year and a half, like insane scale. And then that happened, and then we were back down. Company got cut in half, right? It was like we just deleted half the roster, and it was very painful, and it's very hard for companies to come back from that. But they end up getting acquired by, Flexera. But at the end of the day, from a stock perspective and a payback perspective, like most of us didn't see anything. And so it just goes to show though, like if you do that and you gain all the experiences and you don't let that, if you walk away with learning about those core areas and getting a better sense of what to choose and what to look out for, then even if that occurs, that'll just help you onto the next pick.
Yeah. Talha,
Yeah, immediately I'm thinking of
hit,
like Orum and everything you guys have gone through in such a short period of time, just based on the fact that the company really took off in 2020. Sorry, Mike, what were you going to say?
No, Talha, you've mentioned a couple of times now in this conversation, like the idea of like how fast things move in startups. Things can change in a blink of an eye. You've kind of alluded to that a couple of times. One, just about the market and with this experience. And I'm trying to reconcile that truth with, vetting the founder and the founding team's vision when you're looking to join a company. Because vision, how often does that just change at directions completely, 90 degrees, 180 degrees, when market conditions change or technical challenges come up? How should someone that's kind of vetting a startup to join weigh, I guess, vision, or how, I guess in other words, how can they assess a management team's ability to manage change like that?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, especially looking at the founders themselves, were they part of fast-growing startups? Why did their last, if they failed, right? Like, why did their last startup failed? Even if the last 3 startups failed, like, it wouldn't deter me necessarily, because if they learned from each one, right? And did any of those, startups fail because they didn't innovate fast enough, or that they picked the wrong horse in terms of where the technology is going? Because there are times where you pick the wrong horse and you couldn't predict it, but there's other cases where you could predict it. And so I'll give you an example from like Neptune. So I went to Cloud Velox after RightScale, and they were in the stage of migrating people to the cloud, helping people take advantage of the cloud for things like testing and disaster recovery. So many of our customers that were like SLED, like had an extra data center for their water plant, right? Well, what if that data center went under, or it's just really expensive and it's barely used? Like, let's test it in the cloud. Way better than you having to drive 20 miles up to this bunker, right, and turn things on. So that was solving a problem now that people had. And so when I went to Neptune now, where the founders were really intelligent, right? Some of the smartest engineers I've ever had a chance to work with. And they were building to solve a problem with servers going down and alerts by building this like auto remediation system. And because they had been on the founding team of some of the most powerful underlying technologies at AWS and Amazon, right, they knew about these problems and they had built it there. And so they said, we built it there, let's bring it to market. Now, the thing is that the vision of this self-healing architecture is something that, you know, for an always-on world with all the apps that we have, was clearly going to solve major pain. The problem is that while that pain existed, there was first order priority pain, which was, well, we know our servers are going down and we know sometimes how to fix it, but right now we don't even have alerting set up. I don't even have graphs and monitoring set up. Like the monitoring is messed up. So like we were hooking in all this monitoring and services, but people hadn't even nailed that. And so they had built something that only now, like literally only now, like I would say it is like 7 years ago, almost 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago, they had built a platform for what we're seeing is pretty ubiquitous now in terms of a major pain point in site reliability engineering and DevOps. They had called it, but they had built it before the market experienced the pain. And that's a gamble because maybe the pain happens in 6 months and you're on top of the world and you crush it. But it took 7 years for the market to finally get to a spot where this is like a ubiquitous pain and everyone's trying to solve it. And so you have to answer your question, like you not only have to, that's why you have to understand your core tech. It's super important to understand that, but also understand where is that vision? Is that vision solving a problem that doesn't exist yet, but they expect it to happen? And if so, like, what is their expectations on when that's supposed to happen? Do they have any proof or evidence that that's going to happen, you know, within the time frame of their run rate and their ability to match that? I would likely go with what can you fix now? What is something that is an absolute pain pill, not a vitamin? And you want to pick the startups that are pain pills, right? The vitamins get crushed. You want to pick one that has a pain pill now because, quite honestly, they're close enough to the pain anyway, so that when the pain does become, you know, like the pain in the market does finally arrive of what they predict, like you already have the customer base to sell that to.
Yeah, Tal, you just that's a great example, and you hit on many different topics like painkiller versus vitamin, timing, is it right or not? But I will say, like, just that answer in itself is actually what I would assume as a candidate who's interviewing for a job. If you ask someone about their experiences, the level of detail that you just went into on the circumstances of that situation and what you learned from it and reflecting back on what went well, what didn't go well, to me, an answer coming from someone like that would make me want to work for them, because clearly, like, they have experience that is going to only improve the chances of success with their current company. I think that was like a masterclass. And if you were interviewing me for a job and you gave me that answer, I'd be like, oh, that's someone I want to work for.
Yeah, absolutely. It's to me, it's like very reminiscent of make a lot of, you know, sales analogies here, but you know that you have sort of green reps, right? And they're involved in their first deal and they're getting all those, like, what do they call it? I think the expression is like happy ears or something like that. You know, they're being told all the right things by the point of contact that they're dealing with, but they haven't had a direct conversation with the decision maker. And, you know, unfortunately, I think a lot of times the best way to learn that lesson is to have a major deal sort of fall through. And then you learn to look for these telltale signs that, like, hey, this might not work out. And I feel like you just described how to do that in vetting, you know, not just like a company, but like almost like an entire industry or entire solution. Are there any kind of like tactical tips that you can give to somebody? I think that you have so much great business experience that your business acumen's quite high. And I'm not sure if everyone kind of has had that, especially if they're a little bit earlier on in their career. Are there things that you look for? An example that I would give would be like, if a company says, we're building this solution and there's a federally mandated law that's going to go into place in 2 years, and everyone in this industry has to change to be in compliance with this. Are there things like that you would weigh in doing your own kind of research versus just talking directly to the company or the founders?
I think I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, that's similar to how I say, hey, how do you assess the business in the current economic environment? The economic environment could be something that is influenced by obviously laws, right? Which is a big one. And how do they handle that, going forward? So for example, if you think about the biggest one that I can think of is GDPR, right? Like, how are you GDPR compliant? There's a significant swath of companies that came out, right? And there's a lot of gravestones, and there's a lot of companies that are doing, really, really well. And so a few things that I would look for. Another one that comes to mind immediately is like driver compliance, dot compliance, ELD, electronic logging devices. If you look at like companies like Samsara, Keep Truckin', which is now Go Motive. If you join either one of those companies, you're a really, really good spot, especially if you joined early. And so when it comes to those companies, right, like looking at the founders again and their previous experiences. And in the case of like Samsara, seeing that they had previous experience selling companies, being part of companies that have gone through massive acquisitions or going public. But then at the same time too, I would weigh that and then understand, like, especially the previous work that they've done, but what startup stage are they at? If they are already, if they're brand new and they're doing this because of the federal laws, you want to be very careful, right? Because you also want to think about, okay, are there other startups at different various stages that already maybe have these as customers and can easily replicate, that software, right? What is the X factor going into, this individual and or technology? So understanding the core tech again is super important. And then understanding too, like, do they have the funding and the right metrics? If, for example, they already have customers where they have really high renewal rates, really high growth rates, very low logo churn, and they can sell this service given some of the federal changes that are going to occur, that's a really good bet, right? At the same time, you're going to, on top of this, what I didn't mention earlier, also vet competitors, right? Just because you're looking at this founder and the startup, you do want to vet some of the top competition and see, is this something that is easily replicable, or is there a moat, right? What is their moat? Ask their founders, right? Like, what is preventing someone else from, copy pasting this? Right? Like, what is your X factor? How do you expect to, stay competitive, right? So yeah, I think it's a great question. You can weigh that heavily, but also, it depends, right? Also on what is the federal law. For example, GDPR is something that a lot of security companies and other companies were getting into. There's a lot of consulting services and different things that you can do. There's different parts of GDPR, right? Are you making your CRM GDPR compliant? Are you making your overall organization GDPR compliant, right? Like, people aren't just writing the word password one and putting a sticky note on their computer, right? Like, opening themselves up to getting hacked and then you're screwed on GDPR. That's a completely different solution compared to one that's on your CRM. So you also want to make sure that you vet what is their specific market within that. And electronic logging devices is both a hardware and a software. So if they have a really damn good product, that's a pretty significant moat to have both hardware and software, right? So yeah, that's a great question.
I was going to say, you just have what I would say is, for anybody who might be listening, who might be thinking they're not quite at your level, because I just think you have I'm not trying to gas you up here, but you're, as Mike put it really well at the beginning of the podcast, every conversation we've ever had with you, we've always come away being like, this guy's super smart. And yeah, I think you have a level of business acumen and intellect that, frankly, in a crowd of people that are already pretty impressive, you're somehow above that. But what I was going to ask is, we've touched on a lot of these different ones. And I feel like the way that you broke all that down, a lot of that in knowing you comes down to your curiosity. You're a very curious person. And I just noticed that about you. I think that's like my big takeaway, is that, like, we're going to do our best for this episode to list out the things that you're describing. But I think at the end of the day, it's really about being curious, having a lot of conversations, asking very direct questions, which a lot of people are afraid to do in the interview process because they think that it'll be too forward or whatever. But it's actually, I think it reflects on you really well as an applicant. I will say the two things we didn't really touch on much were just related to, you said, are you genuinely excited? And then you also referenced the company culture. So I'm curious for you, what are those things that you look for in those two kind of key areas?
Yeah, and I'll say that if I'm coming across like this as, I have a lot of experience, et cetera, is because a lot of these have failed, right? And
Right.
it comes from a lot of battle wounds that you learn. And I'll actually address three things in terms of culture, right? We talk about being excited, culture, but also the way that the product is delivered. And so especially now more than ever, when buyers of software interact, they are now looking to test a solution and verify that it works before they're expected to buy, right? Before you could get away, and this is what happened, when I was at T-Mobile, is I was selling a ton of really great recruiting software, but you couldn't test it. It was like, hey, here is $20,000. You buy the software, right? Like, we're not doing any like trials or free pilots, and that ended up hurting us a lot because I feel like we went to market before we truly had product market fit, and then everyone churned, and it became a nightmare there. And I think that also comes down to culture, right? Are you able to be introspective and understand that, hey, like we need to make a change here. Hey, like we need to be able to be more, humble in terms of where we are in the market, and maybe taking a step back and not, putting like all the fuel on the gas if we're not entirely sure, right? Which sometimes founders don't want to do, and I've seen it in other founders too, is they want to instill a level of confidence. But when I look at a company culture, what's really most important to me is like, can they move fast and make decisions fast? Not that they make the right decisions. So that's going to sound really weird, right? So if you're looking at a culture, try to understand how fluid are they, right? At Orum, we have something called logic wins. So it doesn't matter if you're the SDR or you're Jason. If we make a decision at a company level or any level and you don't feel it's logical and you want to back up the reasons why, you have a seat at the table to tell us that. And there are a lot of people on the team that take advantage of that. And of course, these are some of the most high performing reps across the different sections of the company. And I think if you have a culture there where you can say that, that's the first, the winning culture. If you feel throughout your interview or even when you join that you can't say anything, that if you can't complain, right? Like even complaining is to show a problem and you don't have a solution, but you want to say something, you feel like you're going to get in trouble, you're in the wrong company, right? So there has to be a culture of being humble. There has to be a culture of it's okay to make mistakes, but there can't be a culture of stagnation. So something that Jason learned from Bitbull and something I learned from Bitbull, just like listening to him and watching videos, is they have a rule where you never take more than 2 meetings to make a decision. And if half your decisions are right, you're actually moving very fast and you're moving the right way. Because wrong decisions, like 99% of the decisions that we make, like they're not catastrophic. So I would look at that culture, look at Glassdoor if they've been around, if they're Series A, Series B, that is a fair thing to do. And then another way to gauge culture is to look at the employees that were there, how long they were there, right? I even look at like LinkedIn activity, like were they generally excited to post and share about their company? Although that doesn't really matter for certain companies. Like if you work at Stripe, right, you're not going to have engineers, posting on LinkedIn every day. But if you can even reach out to them. I've had candidates reach out to our reps to just see what the culture is like, right? Because the reps themselves are going to be, like much more honest, right? Or at least in terms of like, we'll be honest, but we have inherent biases compared to, maybe someone who just joined the company compared to someone who's like on the founding team. So I know we've tackled those two. I think the last one we would talk about is generally being excited. Yeah. I think honestly, starting a new job is a huge change, right? And you might, and this is going to suck to hear because I know that if you're listening to this and you've been applying to jobs for 6 months, having someone in my position say, well, if you do get a job at a company, but you're not excited about it, don't take it, right? You got to obviously you got to put food on the table. So I'm not suggesting that you do that. But if you are in a position where you do have the ability to kind of pick and choose, right? Choosing those that you're generally excited about and reaching out to those hiring managers with your excitement and how you plan to, be different is one way to set yourself apart. I can tell you right now, when we did an SDR position, we got on LinkedIn, we had to turn it off. We got like 500 applicants, and 90% of those applicants are just clicking to apply, right? So your shit is just getting lost in that. And so of those like 500 applicants, I maybe had 10 people reach out to me directly, right? And if they did, I immediately ping my, ping the recruiter, because even if they were slightly qualified, like if you did that, you jumped ahead of some of the other people, especially if you reached out via email or cold call, right? Like what we expect from you in a sales position, right? So I think if you are genuinely excited and you can show that, and you can reach out to the appropriate people, which now everyone's information is online. There's multiple software platforms or social platforms, that you can reach out on. That's going to be the best way to break through the noise, and also the best way for you to not burn out, right? So if the core tech is great, they got funding, the run rate is there, the founders are good, you feel really passionate about the problem they're solving, and the business can adapt or is adaptable within the current economic environment and can be sold. I mean, at that moment, it all comes down to your excitement. And if you are, I would push really hard to get an interview at that company, right? Don't just give up because you get a decline, right? Shot back to you, and focus on those, because if you get a job and you need it, do it. But I would continue to be on the lookout, because if you're not genuinely excited about the startup, you will not be able to handle the ups and downs. It is going to be a roller coaster ride. And the roller coaster ride is mainly down, right? It's like you have these peaks where like it goes up really high, right? In many startups, and you're doing really well, and then there's a big low, and you're kind of lulling for a while, right? Like the slow and steady line of it looking up that's just a mean average. It's really like significant ups and downs. And you're gonna stick with it for, if it's a startup you really care about, you're gonna be there for 5, 6, 7 years. Like at least before you potentially see any sort of upside on stock, right? Most companies don't, it might be 10 years, right? Before they're acquired or they go public. So just like keep that in mind, right? The excitement's probably the only thing that's probably the most important piece. Like once those pieces are done, because if you're not excited, you won't be able to handle the stress.
Yeah. And I would say on that, extremely like valuable, wise words. So put very well. I would just add on the excitement piece, at least from my own personal learnings, that I think sometimes people confuse excitement with, am I interested in the product or service, right? For me, I've worked my whole career effectively in staffing, some version of staffing. And believe me, 6-year-old Tyler, Rachel, I wanted to be a left winger on the Chicago Blackhawks. That's like what my dream was. I didn't picture myself being the co-founder of a staffing company, but here I am. But what I know about myself now is I truly do love working with exciting, growing companies. I get a lot of fire from that. And staffing is an incredible industry if that's something that gets you jacked up, because you're usually not working with companies that are declining. Usually we're working with companies that are growing. They need people. And so that just excitement, that fire is really, really fun. So the last two are just, one is Orum's an awesome company. I'm sure there's a lot of people out there that would love to join, would just love, join, or also potentially be an Orum customer. Terry, what's the easiest and best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, I mean, if you're interested in a demo or testing the solution, going to orum.com, oru.com, and there's a demo request, you'll be routed quickly to an SDR and AE who will reach out to you. If you're interested in positions, right, you're more than happy to take messages on LinkedIn. On there, it's Talha Husayn at Orum. You can also email me, Terry, Terry at orum.com. Because sometimes LinkedIn is turning into somewhat of a spammy channel. So there's cases where I might have 200 or plus LinkedIn messages, and most of it's like automated junk. So it takes me time to sometimes weave through those, and I don't want anyone to feel like they're I've had people feel like I'm ignoring them because I'm making a post on LinkedIn, but I'm not answering the messages they're sending me, and that's generally because there's just a mayhem in there. So email works as well. In doubt, try all those channels, right? Omni-channel approach has the best reply rate, and that's what I would guide people to do.
some young enterprising, applicant here will maybe listen to this episode and maybe quote something you said. And I'm just saying it for anyone who's listening, it's a guaranteed way to get yourself an interview at Orum. I don't even work there, obviously. I'm going to speak for Terry. I mean, that's just like, if somebody did that to me, you're getting the gold star treatment. So last question is just, if you were to give any piece of advice to someone who is looking for a job right now in this market, it could be about anything. What would you say?
I would say that don't fall into the trap. And I see this on Reddit all the time. I like to kind of peruse and see how people are, especially in tech and sales, are doing, right? And I read directly from the people. It's anonymous, so people are absolutely honest and brutal, right? I've definitely made posts on Reddit and been torn to shreds, even though they don't know who I am, saying I'm wrong about everything. But yeah, one of the things that I've always noticed is that if you look at the way that people go about getting hired, they are like, I sent out 1,000 applications and I got no responses. And quite frankly, again, unless your resume and everything looks really, really good, especially if you're looking at startups, you're not going to be able to get in front of the right people. It's just way too noisy right now. This happened again, and I learned my lesson in the great financial collapse that just clicking on, going to monster.com and clicking on a bunch of jobs is just not the way to go. What really worked out well was picking the top 10 companies I was most excited about, figuring out who at the company works and do I have any connections, any way that I can break in, right? With RightScale was my friend Greg who worked there. And so I was constantly hounding him, just get me an interview, like, let me talk to them, I'll apply, right? And so that's how I was able to break in there. For some of the other companies, it was through my network. It was never through applying at a job. I found the companies I was super excited about, reached out to the founders directly, anyone that I can get in. You'll need to break through the noise, right? Especially in sales, like it's going to be about how do you be strategic? How do you break through the noise, right? So I would take that approach because you are at least going to get a reply. It doesn't mean that you stop applying to all those companies. You can definitely continue to click and apply everything. But I see a lot of people get beat up because they're like, man, I spent 6 hours just applying jobs and heard nothing back. Well, most likely the person who cared and might have been able to hire you never saw it. And it's stupid and it sucks. But when you're battling against hundreds of candidates, it's difficult not to be a number in these applicant tracking systems. And it's difficult for the person hiring. I can't tell you on my recruiter, they pass up candidates that were like, these guys aren't qualified. What better candidates? They're like, well, I have 600 people to look for, right? I have to make decisions fast because you're asking me to fill the seat tomorrow. So I feel for both the recruiter and the person getting recruited right now.
Certainly. Amazing. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. This has been another awesome episode of What Worked. We're thrilled to finally have Talha on here because you've just been an amazing friend and sort of colleague to us. And if you haven't checked out Orum already and you're in anything related to sales, I don't know what you're doing. So go check out Orum. But more importantly, I'd say just connect and follow Talha on LinkedIn because he says some really awesome, insightful stuff, not just here, but there as well. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And like and subscribe, like and subscribe, like and subscribe.